All right, so 2026 ASWB has some huge changes, and that is a big difference for a lot of us because we have been studying and preparing things, but we have not thought about how this actual exam is going to impact us when it comes to taking the exam. So we're going to go ahead and break it down. We're going to go over the new blueprints. We're going to kind of talk about what sections are going to be changed and all that good stuff. All right, so the format. The numbers matter. 122 questions total. Yes, only 110 are scored, 12 are unscored. You have 2 sections of 61 questions each. So you have about 2 hours to take 61 questions. So before we used to say it was 90 seconds, well, 90 seconds or a minute and a half per question. Now you roughly have 2 minutes per question, way more time than before. So keep that in mind. And instead of having those 4 weighted areas, it's down to 3. Now just keep in mind, values and ethics, like I tell you, ethics first, is the highest weighted area. All right. So the new weighting system, you have to know your level. If you are taking this exam and you're taking the clinical exam, ethics is 36%, master's is 35%, bachelor's is 35%. Either way, it doesn't matter. 35% of anything out of 100 is a majority of it. So you need to understand how important the values and ethics is. And then you can see the assessment and planning and intervention and practice. You can check those sections. All right. So with this being said, your study time, you want to have a reality check. If you split your hours evenly across 3 areas, you're understudying ethics because ethics is most important. So I would definitely get out that code of ethics and I would read through it pretty much probably throughout the week, just reading certain sections of it, just having it as your handy dandy notebook or your clinical Bible or your test prep Bible, whatever it is, it should not leave your side. And whenever you have some free time, that is the section that you would want to study and you would want to focus on. Now, the 2026 editions, a lot of them sit in that diversity and social justice section, and you'll see as we go through some of the content what that means and how that looks. All right, so what we're going to cover today is the 12 topics. I've talked about it in a few YouTube videos, the 12 topics that are changed, but I didn't go into depth. Obviously, I saved that information for you guys. So these are the 12 sections. Take a chance to kind of look at them, see what sections might be a little bit more difficult or things that you're like, oh, I know that. Accessibility and neurodiversity, that's easy for me. Evidence-based practices, I got it. Technology and social media, that's perfect. So if you look at these 12 sections, you kind of hone in on the areas that you really know well and then focus on the areas that you're like, I'm not so sure. This might be a little bit more challenging. So let's jump into anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice. And this is going to be under diversity and social justice as we share. Anti-oppressive practice basically challenges all forms of systemic oppression. The worker here examines their own power and privilege. So in a test question, if you're working with someone and you're dealing with the anti-oppressive practice, you want to make sure that you're examining your power and your privilege that you have in that situation. Really, really important to understand that. Anti-racist practice, actively working against racism. So when you look at anti-oppressive practice, that is pretty much all forms of systemic oppression. Anti-racist practice focuses on racism, just merely racism. So that's it. So it's not just, oh, they're racist, but everything that comes with racism as a whole. Both require action, not just an attitude. And then intersectionality. This isn't a new term. We talk about it all the time in boot camp and different various parts of the course. It's basically when you have overlapping systems. So you have race and gender, you have class, disability, sexuality. These are the things that the person has to deal with as they are dealing with the oppressed system. So think about it like this. You have a African-American male, so you have the race, you have the gender, who considers himself to be homosexual. He also has a learning disability, and these are all parts of an overlapping system. So not only does he have to deal with the dynamics of race, he also has to deal with the dynamics of his gender, his sexuality, also his disability. And maybe he has a low income instead of a disability. He has in a low social economic status. That would be the class. So you have to understand, a client is never only identified as one thing. So in intersectionality, we have to look at all the things that make up that person and how these different systems can cause problems. All right. So when you're looking at this, you want to look at it alongside culture, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender. Let's move on to bias and microaggressions. Really important. So before we hear the word microaggressions all the time, like, oh, that was a microaggression, or was that a bias? And we're going back and forth. Now they're breaking it down and making it simplified. Micro assaults, which I had never heard of this term, but these are some new things. Micro assaults, micro insults, micro invalidations. These are all forms of microaggression. So instead of just the plain old microaggression, when they say, oh wow, you speak really well to be African American, or wow, your hair is really, whatever it may be, those are the microaggressions that we're used to. Now the micro assaults, they're deliberate and explicit. So they're not something that's subtle. This person is deliberately and explicitly saying something that is inappropriate, and that is a micro assault. Obviously, when you think of an assault, you think of something that is deliberate and something that is not appropriate, or something that someone doesn't care about, or they're explicit in their way of doing it. So that's kind of helpful to look at that micro assault when you see an example of that. Micro insults, unintentional demeaning. So that is something someone says when it's an insult, but they didn't necessarily intend for it to be. They're just not aware. They lack understanding. So it's unintentionally being demeaning. And then you have the micro invalidations. That is dismissing someone's lived experience. So someone's saying, oh, I've been through this, or I did this, and you're kind of dismissing it like, oh, I've done that too, or oh, I've lived there, or oh yeah, I know how it is to, live in a rough neighborhood. That is a micro invalidation. We want to validate our clients. We know that. We don't want to invalidate them and make them feel as if something they're dealing with and going through is just a normal experience, or oh, we've done it too. All right. Implicit bias operates outside of awareness and still causes harm. So basically what that's saying is that someone can be biased and they might not even be aware of it, but it can still be very harmful to an individual. So it's really, really important to understand biases and microaggressions. And all of this is important to know, but how does it pertain to social workers? Yes, social workers, we have to explain our own biases and our positionality. So we have a position when it comes to certain things, and we have to be knowledgeable about that. We have to understand it, and we have to explain it in the process, so that way we can be self-aware. We want to advocate for systemic change, not just individual treatment. And we never adopt a colorblind stance. So we don't act as if we don't see color and color doesn't matter and everyone's the same. That is not something we do. I don't see color is a micro invalidation, and it is always the wrong answer on an exam. So that is something that we will not do. Hey, this is for my private practice owners. If you're scheduling, charting, chasing payments in 5 different places, this is for you. I run a busy practice and systems are non-negotiable. The platform that keeps everything together for me is Jane. Clients book themselves, my schedule stays clean, charting happens inside the same system, so no late night paperwork. Whew. And payments handled right inside of Jane. Telehealth, client portal, documentation, all in one place. Clinicians don't burn out from clients. We burn out from chaos. Jane helps me run my practice like a CEO and stay grounded as a clinician. If you're ready to simplify, use my Jane Ambassador link below in the bio, and I'm telling you, Jane app is a game changer, and it's going to definitely help take your practice to the next level. All right, so let's go through a question. Let's see what it looks like. A Black client tells their social worker, I feel like my concerns are dismissed at work because of my race. The social worker responds, I think everyone faces challenges at work. Let's focus on your coping skills. The social worker's response is best described as, we don't have to go any further. It is a micro invalidation. That person said something that they're going through. They said something that's challenging them. They said something that is causing them a problem at work, and we minimize it. We told them that, hey, everybody faces that. Let's focus on your coping skills. That is a micro invalidation that dismisses the client's lived experience of racism. So we want to make sure we pay attention to that. Again, colorblind and everyone has a problem responses are always wrong. We have to acknowledge systemic racism. We have to validate lived experience. We never want to minimize that. So go ahead and take that in, guys. Get your pen and paper so you can write this down in this example, and you'll have a better understanding of it as we move forward. All right, power differential and racial privilege. The power differential. Every worker or client relationship carries an inherent power imbalance, because if you're typically in a position of power when you're working with a client, so there's always going to be some imbalance there. Whether you provide professional authority, gatekeeping of resources, documentation, mandating reporting, all those types of things put you in a position of power. All right. So definitely keep that in mind. You want to understand there are going to be different sections that we go over, and it's going to be under the professional boundaries and under privilege. But right now, I want you to have a good understanding of it. Naming that imbalance out loud is a legitimate intervention. Saying that, I understand that I'm in a position of power. I understand that I am a mandated reporter. These are the things of you taking a stance and understanding that. Racial privilege, unearned advantage conferred by race, whether or not it is sought. We hear the terminology all the time, white privilege. White people don't walk around saying, hey, I have white privilege, but it is a given that certain things and certain people are considered and given an advantage because of the color of their skin. skin. So that is an example of racial privilege. Privilege is structural. It's not just about an individual thing and making someone feel guilty because they're a certain color. It's how the system is set up to favor and to give things or opportunities to individuals of different races. Workers must examine their own positionality, not just the client's identity. These are things that we must realize when it comes to racial privilege. Internalized inferiority. When a member of an oppressed group absorbs the dominant culture's negative messages, that is internalized inferiority. It can present as self-blame, shame, low expectations, or distrust of one's own judgment. So do not treat it as a distorted cognition like, oh, they're thinking it's crazy or they're just a little off. It's a response to real oppression. So when you have that internalized superiority, the other half, the AKS, we talked a little bit about that. That's, we talked about the knowledge and skills and things of that nature. So you're going to see the AKS. This is the applied knowledge and skills. Before we called it the cases, which is the knowledge, skills, and abilities. So it's changed up a little bit. So when you see that AKS, don't let it confuse you. That's pretty much what it is. It's just terms and information that they want us to know for the exam, and you want to be able to apply the knowledge and the skills when working with individuals. So when a member of a dominant group observes a message of inherent worth or entitlement, and it may present as defensiveness, dismissal, or expectation of deference. And both directions are testable. So please keep that in mind. So basically what we're saying here is internalized superiority. When you're individuals of a certain dominant culture, they are automatically, it says when they are automatically observing these messages of inherent worth or entitlement, they can come off as being defensive, dismissive, or expecting of some type of difference. That is what we want to know and understand. That is what internalized superiority looks like. Internalized racial and ethnic inferiority and superiority. If you only study one direction, you only study half of the applied knowledge and skills. You have to know it goes both ways. So power differential on the exam. A Latina client in her third session tells the white social worker, you probably think I'm not trying hard enough. People like me really never get ahead. That's just how it is. The social worker should first use cognitive restructuring to help them think something and not overgeneralize their thinking, explore the experiences that have shaped the belief and name the power dynamic in the room, or reassure the client that the social worker does not judge her and move on from the treatment plan. Correct. We are going to explore. That's right there. What is the first thing? That's a first style question too. So if you're looking at FMBM, we can do that all day. Right there, it's a first style question. So we're going to explore. Exploring is just another way of gathering information or assessing, trying to process and figure out things. So that is what we're going to do. When a client names race in a room, that is what it is. That's the material. That's the data. That's the information. We do not reassure past it, and we do not restructure it that way. We actually address it right then and there. We explore how they're feeling, what's going on, and we don't just shimmy past it. Accessibility and neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is defined as differences. So neurological differences, you see that a lot with individuals that are diagnosed with autism, ADHD, dyslexia. These are natural human variations. They're not deficits that need to be fixed. At one point in time, that was how we looked at it. Now we look at it as this kind of like a superpower. It's their strength. That's what makes them different. That is what we're switching from. A deficit to a strength. Pathology to something that is just different. That is what we're moving towards. The old model is we had to fix people who had these issues or had these differences, should I say. The new model, we accommodate, we affirm, and we adapt to that person's environment. We come from an affirming practice standpoint. Strength-based, we focus on what the person can do. We identify first language as acceptable. We do not force compliance with neurotypical social norms. We do not mask the causes of burnout. Traditional social skills training may have not been affirming, but that is what we're doing now. Interpreters in ASL. So we already know when we have to provide professional interpreters. We never use family members. Family interpreters break confidentiality and they can distort the content. So informed consent must be given in accessible language. And deaf culture is a cultural identity as well. It's not a disability. That is another thing. Deaf culture is a cultural identity, not a disability. So the ASL, American Sign Language, we're not looking at a person's having a problem or disease or disability. We're looking at like, okay, this is a culture of individuals and we have to learn how to adapt and how to adjust. All right, so language access, translation and interpretation. You have physical access like facilities, transportation, mobility. Neurodiversity accommodations belong in all three of these areas. You have it, language, physical, and cultural access. That is what we're looking at. If a client is not distressed, do not create a problem. Don't try to fix them. Just accommodate, affirm, and adapt. That is what we're doing here. So this is how neurodiversity might present on the exam. A social worker is providing providing services to a 14-year-old autistic client whose parents are concerned that their child doesn't socialize like other children. The client reports feeling comfortable with their current social interactions and expressed distress about being forced into social skills groups. What should the social worker do first? Again, it's a first style question. We're exploring, we're not referring, we're not educating. So this is a pretty easy one, but what we want to do is explore the client's perspective on the social needs and validate the experience. Identifies whose distress is in the vignette. Treating the parents' discomfort by challenging the child is almost always the wrong thing to do. The client is the child. That is the identified client. And we don't want to just, because the parents feel uncomfortable, kind of diminish the child's feelings in this point. We want to explore their perspective. All right, section 4, MMIW and cultural exploitations. Now, this is a new one under cultural impacts of exploitation across marginalized community. This is a really important topic and it's new, but we're going to break it down and talk about it a little bit. All right, you have MMIW, which is missing and murdered Indigenous women. Now, when you're looking at this can fall under like financial exploitation, immigration status, and trafficking. But let me tell you what this is. There's a current crisis right now going on where there's a disproportionate amount of violence, disappearance, and murder of Indigenous women. Yes, girls. It's called the Two-Spirit people in the US and in Canada. Now, this is really interesting and important to know because if you're in your own little world, we're watching the news, we're focused on certain things, we probably did not know that there is a lot of women, Indigenous women, that are being separated, murdered, dealing with violence, disappearing. So this is really important to understand and to know. We hear of trafficking, but this is really important to know that a lot of Indigenous women are dealing with this. Native women face murder rates far above the national average. 4 out of 5 Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. So that means you go through a line of women and 1, 2, 3, 4 have experienced it. The 5th person maybe not. 1, 2, 3, 4 have experienced it. The 5th one not. That is high, guys. So when you're looking at something 4 out of 5, you guys know percentages. So that means 80% of Native American women have experienced violence in their lifetime. That's a huge amount. Many cases still go unsolved. So some of the causes here: colonialism, forced assimilation, residential and boarding schools, family separation, judicial gaps between the tribe, the state, and federal law, systemic racism and historical invisibility, connected to trafficking, domestic violence, substance use, poverty. As you can see, there are a lot of root causes, but it's really important to understand and to know. As social workers, that is our job. We have to practice cultural humility. We do not impose Western frameworks. We have to understand the historical and systematic context behind the crisis. We have to support tribal sovereignty and self-determination. We have to connect clients to cultural appropriate services, advocate at the systemic level. So some of these things that you're going to see when you're doing a test question or you're going through it, these assessment implications. If someone's hypervigilant and distrust of systems, that's rational. Like, this is something that happens. We have to be mindful of that. We do not code an inaccurate threat or appraise as someone just having an anxiety disorder. We have to understand what this person likely has been through and get through the root cause and what's happening. We want to screen for exploitation and trafficking. And we also want to understand that grief here is communal. It's not an individual thing. They grieve as a community, not individually. So it's really, really important to understand culture. And that's where it comes in with us being culturally competent and also having that cultural humility. So really important to have both when you're dealing with the missing and murdered Indigenous women. This is a systemic exploitation issue, so we don't want to reduce it to just that individual client is dealing with something. All right, so on an exam, a social worker at a community mental health center is working with a 28-year-old Indigenous woman. She reports anxiety, hypervigilance, difficulty trusting systems after her cousin went missing 2 years ago. The client expresses frustration that law enforcement has been unresponsive. What should the social worker do? Again, guys, we're doing a lot of validation. As you can see, that is really important with the content and the information and the context of how we're dealing with clients, and not just this exam, but probably the exam in general. We always want to validate someone's experience. But yes, you can focus treating the client and the individual, but a lot of this stuff presents as anxiety symptoms, but is much more based on what this person has dealt with. So that's why it's important to understand a person's background, and that's where that cultural competence comes in at, and then also having that cultural humility to realize you don't know everything and allow that person to educate you.